Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. India is betting big on semiconductors and making some bold moves. Tonight, we'll tell you about the global alliance that India is joining, what it stands to gain, how this industry is projected to grow, and how India is poised to make the most of it. Meanwhile, China's latest hit job features India's Foreign Minister S Jaishankar, a Global Times opinion piece that has now been taken off, but not before exposing them. In the US, they're counting down to the big presidential debate, Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. In Kolkata, 1 month since the rape and murder of a woman doctor, more politics, more protests, but no solutions. In Vietnam, Typhoon Yagi leaves a trail of destruction. In Manipur, violence flares up again, this time with drones and rockets. In Pakistan, the IMF loan is delayed yet again, and that's causing some panic. Meanwhile, Imran Khan's supporters have given an ultimatum to the government. The Pope's historic Asia tour has taken him to Timor, Leste, where he's run into controversy over his comments about pets. Algeria just had an election that has once again exposed Western hypocrisy. Mexico is seeing protests over a judicial overhaul. The question is, should judges be elected or appointed? And why is the internet joking about Vijay Mallya? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Iran rejects accusations that it sent arms to Russia to help Moscow fight Ukraine. The US and European Union claim Tehran supplied ballistic missiles to Moscow. The West warns of new sanctions on Iran if the deliveries are confirmed. Russia and Iran are already under international sanctions. Isolated by the West, both countries have forged stronger bilateral ties. Israel strikes Syria, killing at least 16 people. The overnight attack reportedly targeted military sites in central Syria. Damascus claims to have shot down some of the Israeli missiles. Strikes by Israel on Syria have surged after Hamas's attack in October last year. But Damascus has tried to stay out of the conflict amid fears of a wider regional war. India confirms its first case of Mpox. The Union Health Ministry says the infected individual is a young male. He's being treated at an isolation facility and is said to be stable. Health Ministry officials have ruled out any widespread risk to the public. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi holds talks with the Abu Dhabi Crown Prince. This is the Crown Prince's first official visit to India. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Modi visited the UAE. During this visit, he inaugurated the first Hindu temple in Abu Dhabi. India and the UAE are among each other's top trading partners. The Prime Ministers of Spain and Norway visit China amid trade tensions. Both the European leaders meet the Chinese president in Beijing. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez calls for, and I'm quoting, for a fair trade order. His visit comes amid a tariff standoff between China and the European Union. And a fuel tanker explosion in Nigeria kills at least 59 people. The tanker exploded after colliding with a truck carrying passengers and cattle. The incident took place in northern Nigeria. Fuel tanker explosions are common in this country where roads are poorly maintained. Tonight, we want to talk about semiconductors or chips. They're shaping our present and they will define our future. India wants to be a semiconductor powerhouse. By 2029, India wants to be among the world's top 5 chip producers. The top 5 in the next 5 years. It's an ambitious target, but it is a goal worth chasing. Our world today runs on chips. They power every modern day gadget that we use. But chip production is a complicated process, and a clutch of companies control the world's chip supplies. Although that is set to change, because global supply chains are being remade and India is in a unique position to capitalize. The United States agrees with this assessment. Today, it welcomed India into a new chip partnership. It's a US-led initiative run by their State Department. It has 7 members or partners: Costa Rica, Indonesia, Kenya, Mexico, Panama, the Philippines, and Vietnam. Today, India became the 8th partner in this alliance. And what does New Delhi stand to gain from this? For starters, American investment to build India's semiconductor ecosystem. The Americans are expected to focus on two areas. The first is semiconductor assembly, where India puts together the various pieces, testing the final chip and then shipping it to the rest of the world. So that's the first focus area, chip assembly. The second area is training, sharing technological know-how with Indian engineers. Now, these are the two things that the US wants to work on, chip assembly and sharing technology. The actual investment may take some time to materialize. They will start with some assessments, basically to evaluate India's current chip ecosystem. Where do we stand? To identify the gaps and to see where investments may be needed. Now, this could range from workforce development to infrastructure needs. And once this assessment is done, India and the US will finalize joint initiatives. And we must add here that New Delhi needs all the support it can get in this field, because mastering chip manufacturing is not easy. It's a highly complex process. The first step is design, and that alone can take years, even decades, to develop a powerful chip. You need extensive research and development. The process is expensive and the path is not linear. Let's say you have an idea for a new chip, one that can outperform all existing chips. But you need access to proprietary technology from another company. So your first step will be to approach them, that company, negotiate for access to the technology, and only then, only when you have the go-ahead, can you start the design process. The next step is to manufacture the chip, and for that you need a fabrication unit. Again, these factories are not easy to build. Building just one such unit can cost anywhere between $10 to $20 billion. So the cost can be prohibitive. Plus, there are several other complexities involved, like accessing chip-making machinery. There is a small pool of companies which control the supply of these machines. Access to raw materials is also a challenge, and all of this is clear to India. India realizes that this is a challenging task. It is trying to tackle all the challenges together and leapfrog in the global chip race. India is offering more incentives to chip makers. Earlier, the government had offered $10 billion. Now it is raising the amount to $15 billion. That is in incentives. India is also changing some conditions. It wants to focus less on chip assembly and more on manufacturing. So more incentives will be provided for raw materials, gases and chemicals, basically the stuff required to fabricate a chip. So that's one area of focus. The second part is securing the supplies and the know-how. Last week, Prime Minister Modi was in Singapore and he sealed a deal on semiconductors there.
हम बहुत एग्रेसिवली सेमीकंडक्टर के क्षेत्र में जा रहे हैं। अब तक करीब 5 कंपनियां ऑलरेडी अपना काम शुरू कर चुकी हैं। आगे भी औरों की संभावना है और हम पूरी इकोसिस्टम को लाने वाले हैं। हम कोई एक छोटा सा टुकड़ा एक आध हिस्सा करके अटकने वाले नहीं है।
Singapore is critical to India's plans. It makes 10% of the world's chips and around 20% of the semiconductor manufacturing equipment. 9 out of the top 15 chip makers have a presence in Singapore. From design to assembly to fabrication, packaging and testing, even raw materials and manufacturing equipment, Singapore has all these areas covered, so it can be a valuable partner for India. Today, India's semiconductor ecosystem is valued at around $20 billion. $20 billion today. By 2028, it could cross $80 billion. So, a 4-fold increase in 4 years. That's the projection. This industry has tremendous growth potential, and India has all the right ingredients to be a chip powerhouse. Let's turn to China now. Their propaganda press has been quite busy, specifically the Global Times. This morning, they published a new article, a new piece. It talks about the biggest problem with India's foreign policy. Guess what it is? According to the Global Times, it's S Jaishankar, India's foreign minister. They call him the biggest problem with India's foreign policy. Now, this is a very bold claim to make, especially with no evidence whatsoever. Maybe that's why the Global Times has taken down the article. You won't find it on their website anymore, but do not worry, we have a copy for you. And tonight we're going to break it down. What does the article say, and what does it reveal about China's mentality? Global Times is making 2 broad points. One, that bilateral ties between India and China are improving, that India and China are keen to fix the contentious issues. And two, that Jaishankar is the roadblock, that he is preventing a reset. And to prove this, they have quoted Jaishankar's recent statement. Listen to what they've said. India has a China problem, a special China problem that is over and above the world's general China problem. This is supposed to be China's smoking gun, but it's not a gun, and it's definitely not smoking, though maybe the folks at Global Times are. In 2020, China tried to illegally grab Indian land. They killed 20 Indian soldiers. Since then, both sides are locked in a standoff. There are thousands of soldiers and weaponry on both sides of the border. If this isn't a problem, what is? What else would you call a belligerent, expansionist and imperialist neighbor? Frankly, problem is an understatement. But let's read on. The Global Times goes on to psychoanalyze Jaishankar's statement and look at their conclusion. They say that Jaishankar has envy and jealousy towards China. Well, can you blame him? Look at how China treats its foreign minister. The last one literally went missing. No one saw him for more than a month. The rumor was he was jailed or killed. Why wouldn't Jaishankar be jealous of something like that? It's perfectly normal. But jokes aside, what is the Global Times' logic here? They say Jaishankar wants India to move closer to the US, which is why he is against a reset with China. There is no evidence to support this claim, though. But then again, it's an opinion piece, so we let that fly. An even bigger problem appears towards the end of the article. Let me quote that again. As Minister of External Affairs, Jaishankar's priority seems not to be national interest. Many politicians in India just use the country as a tool for personal gain. They do not take the long-term interests of the country seriously. Well, this is not an opinion. This is dangerous stuff. Global Times is saying that India's foreign minister is not prioritizing India's national interests, again, without proof. What does this say about China's mentality? A, they're not happy with the negotiator, aka S Jaishankar, and B, they've got this conflict completely wrong. Jaishankar met his Chinese counterpart twice in July. Both times he made the same point. Peace at the border is essential for normalcy in ties. Basically, fix the border, then we can talk. But China wants to hear something else. They want India to keep the border issue on the back burner and to focus on positives instead of negatives. But Jaishankar said no. And that's not just his position. That's what most of India feels, the government, the opposition, the parliament, all of them. But China's state media has missed the point. And they've done so in the past as well. Attacking top diplomats is a typical Chinese strategy. They did so to former US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, UK's ex-Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, and Japan's former Defense Minister. So it's not really a criticism, it's a badge of honor, we'd say. Which brings us to the second point about China's mentality. They have clearly misread the situation. The border is the main worry for India. It's not TikTok, not PUBG, not Chinese investments, and not China's designs in the South China Sea. It's very different from the United States. They have ideological and systemic problems with China's rise. India has never said that. New Delhi's primary concern is peace at the border, and China must realize that. India is not a Japan or Philippines or South Korea. It is not a US ally out to get China. It's simply looking out for itself. As long as Beijing refuses to accept that, this relationship will not improve. Blaming S Jaishankar will not change that, nor will dozens of rounds of military talks. So stop hiding behind your state mouthpieces, stop eyeing your neighbor's land, and then maybe ties will improve.
Our leaders are dumb. Dumb.
Donald Trump were to be re-elected, he intends to give more tax cuts to billionaires and big corporations.
These people are stupid people that are running our country.
It is a dead heat. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are virtually tied in opinion polls. Trump leads Harris 48 to 47%. But the Democratic nominee is unfazed.
Madam Vice President, how will you handle it on the debate stage if Trump decides to launch a personal attack?
Are you ready, Madam Vice President?
Ready.
Harris will face Donald Trump tomorrow. This is the second presidential debate for this election, but the first direct encounter between Harris and Trump. A few months ago, Harris was watching from the sidelines when Trump delivered a knockout punch to Biden. That was during the first presidential debate. Biden's performance was abysmal, so much so that he had to bow out of the race and make way for his Vice President Kamala Harris, and she's had a good run, a good campaign so far. But it may not be enough to hand her a win. Her nomination was supposed to be the game changer, to infuse new energy into the Democratic camp, and a party did rally behind her. They nominated Harris unanimously. She's also raised a lot of money. So far, Kamala Harris has raised more than $400 million compared to just $130 million that Trump has got. So Harris has raised 3 times as much money as Donald Trump. But none of this is enough to ensure a win. What about the other side? Well, Donald Trump is ahead, but his lead is marginal. And even Trump knows that this election is not in the bag, so he's sharpening his attacks on Harris.
In city after city, the law-abiding citizen is forced to live in fear and danger and in filth. Mothers can't take their kids to the park. Graffiti is everywhere. The innocent are victimized in random attacks. Very brutal attacks and slayings are absolutely commonplace. Mobs of criminals walk into stores and clean out thousands of dollars in merchandise with absolutely no fear of punishment because you're not allowed to do your jobs.
Public safety or lack of it, illegal immigration, the high cost of living, and the wars in Ukraine and West Asia. These are Trump's 4 main points of attack against Kamala Harris, and he's expected to push harder on these points during the debate tomorrow. His campaign has just got a boost. A judge decided to delay Trump's sentencing. This is in the Stormy Daniels hush money trial, where Trump was found guilty by the court. He had falsified his business records. The case revolves around a woman called Stormy Daniels, a former adult film star. Trump had an affair with her. He paid $130,000 to buy her silence, and he concealed this payment from the business records, from his business records. But he won't be sentenced in the case till late November now. So that's well after the election. And this is a problem for Kamala Harris, because throughout her campaign, she has tried to paint Trump as a criminal. But now the judge's decision blunts her attack. So how will Harris counter it? Well, she may choose to highlight something completely different, like her endorsements from Republicans. These are leaders from Donald Trump's party who are now backing Kamala Harris. At least 2 senior lawmakers have endorsed her, former Vice President Dick Cheney and his daughter, Liz Cheney. She's a former congresswoman from Wyoming. And Harris spoke about this while campaigning.
Actually, I'm honored to have their endorsement. A lot of what I think is happening, and I was just talking with some folks here in Pittsburgh about it, is that people are exhausted about the division and the attempts to kind of divide us as Americans.
Kamala Harris is going to need more than that, though. This might be the final debate before the election. There is no third debate planned as of now. Trump and Harris have never met each other before, and they certainly haven't debated each other. So tomorrow would be the first and perhaps the only time when we'll see them go head to head. And what are the rules of this debate? It will be 90 minutes long, 90. There will be no opening statements. Each candidate will get 2 minutes to answer a question. Once they're done, the opponent will be allowed to respond. They won't be allowed to interrupt each other. While one candidate is speaking, the other's mic will be muted. In the end, both will have an opportunity to give closing remarks. Kamala Harris will go first and Donald Trump last. So how are the candidates preparing for the debate? Reports say that for the past 5 days, Harris has been in a hotel in Pittsburgh rehearsing on a stage and under TV lighting with one of her advisors role-playing Donald Trump. What about the former president? Well, Trump is said to be taking it easy. He has done only a handful of practice sessions so far. The world will be watching their clash. Presidential debates often make or break campaigns. Let's see how this one turns out. It's been 1 month since the rape and murder case in Kolkata. In this time, we've seen everything: the usual outrage, the candlelight marches, the political promises, and the political games. Do you know what we haven't seen? Concrete solutions. On Sunday, night rallies were held across Indian cities. Night rallies. Women protesters came out in large numbers. Their mission was to reclaim the night, to demand safety on the streets for women. In Kolkata, thousands flooded the roads. They carried banners and formed human chains. Take a look.
We want justice.
Protests were also organized abroad. More than 130 cities across 25 countries saw protests. 130 cities across the world. Japan, Australia, the United States, Singapore, all of them had protests organized by the Indian diaspora. And who coordinated all of this? Dr. Deepti Jain, she is an alumna of Calcutta National Medical College and Hospital. Now, these protests came ahead of an important hearing. India's Supreme Court, India's top court, has taken up this case, and today they flagged a new issue, that of a missing document, the post-mortem challan. You see, when a body is sent for autopsy, it is sent with a document, and this document has very important details like what articles were found on the body, what remains of the victim's clothes. All this information is contained in the post-mortem challan. But this document, this challan, was not produced by the West Bengal government, and the court found it fishy.
There is no reference of this challan for use when a dead body is sent for examination. You need to explain.
Yes, certainly, Madam.
So tomorrow, if this document is missing, then something is happening.
Yeah, sure, Madam. Sure.
The court also announced two major moves. One, it asked the CBI to produce another status report. The CBI is the Central Bureau of Investigation. They are currently probing the murder case. The court asked them for another report today. And the second thing they asked was for the protesting doctors to resume work. You see, junior doctors in West Bengal are on strike. They have been on strike for 28 days now. So the state's health services have been crippled. The West Bengal government claims that 28 patients died because of this doctor strike, because doctors were not on duty. So the Supreme Court has issued an order today. Junior doctors must resume work by 5 p.m. tomorrow. If not, the state can take disciplinary action against them. Which brings us to the political developments. Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee is under a lot of pressure. The BJP, the opposition party in the state, the BJP says that she must fire the Kolkata Police Commissioner. And frankly, this was expected. The only suspect in the case is a civic volunteer, plus the initial police probe is under a lot of scrutiny. They filed an FIR after a delay of 14 hours. A mob vandalized the crime scene despite police presence. So Kolkata cops have a lot to answer for. Maybe the Chief Minister will ignore the opposition's demand. But can she ignore her own party men? One of her party colleagues, one of her party MPs has resigned in protest. His name is Jawahar Sarkar. He was a TMC member of the Rajya Sabha. He says he's disappointed by Mamata Banerjee's handling of this crisis. Apparently, it's too little too late, so he has resigned. The West Bengal governor is also building pressure. He's urging the Chief Minister to fire the top cop. But why isn't she doing it? Apparently, the commissioner has offered to resign multiple times. But a big festival is coming up soon. Durga Puja, which begins next month. Thousands of people hit the streets of West Bengal during Durga Puja, so the Chief Minister is worried about law and order. She wants an old hand during the festival. But eventually, she will have to take a call. If she sacks the police commissioner, it's an admission of mistakes. If she doesn't, the outrage will grow. It's a tough call for Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee. But politics aside, what is being done to improve the safety at hospitals? You may remember the Supreme Court had set up a task force. Well, that group has now run into trouble. The task force set up subgroups to handle key issues. It has doctors, it has bureaucrats, but it has no nurses. So major nursing unions are up in arms. They say, we are the largest workforce in any hospital. How can you ignore us? And it tells you how much work really needs to be done and how many stakeholders need to be consulted. But giving up is not an option. 1-month vigils and night protests are all fine, but that public pressure needs to translate into work behind the scenes, into better laws and better security checks. If not, time will pass by, but nothing will change. Our next story is from Vietnam, which has been battered by Typhoon Yagi. 59 people have died, hundreds have been injured, and the numbers are expected to go up as the country assesses the full extent of the damage. The typhoon hit Vietnam on Saturday. Since then, it has wreaked havoc, flooding cities, disrupting power supplies, and even causing a bridge to collapse. Now, typhoons are not new to this region, but Typhoon Yagi is the most powerful storm in Asia this year. So what explains this turbocharged freak weather? Our next report tells you.
The hotel employees were visibly struggling. The gales were too strong even for their bodies. They tried to keep the doors shut, but the wind nearly forced it open. Such was the strength of Typhoon Yagi, Asia's most powerful storm of this year. On Saturday, it made its landfall in Vietnam. Immediately, 2 provinces were hit by strong winds and rainfall. Highways were flooded, trees were uprooted, telecommunication lines were disrupted. Many cities were without electricity, and economic activity in Vietnam came to a halt. 59 people were killed, hundreds are injured, and the death toll could rise in the coming days.
In my entire life, I haven't seen typhoon with this brutal wind. Very strong. Have knocked down many trees on the street. I have to temporarily be under the shelter, under the bridge.
The storm has devastated the city. Trees fell down to people's house, cars, and people on the street, causing huge damages to Hanoi and to the country.
The infrastructure is badly hit, like this bridge in the country. It collapsed when the storm came. 10 cars and trucks, along with 2 motorbikes, fell into the river. One survivor was driving when the bridge collapsed. Before he knew what was happening, he was in the river. Thankfully, he managed to hold on to a drifting tree to stay afloat.
Both I and the vehicle fell into the river. I thought I was at the bottom or near the bottom of the river. I gathered my best to float to the surface. I was out of breath. When I was on the surface, I still thought I would not be able to survive.
At Ha Long Bay, 30 vessels sank. It's a tourist hotspot and also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Nearly 3,300 houses have been destroyed. Nearly 300,000 acres of crops are damaged. Some parts of the country are still underwater with no electricity. By Sunday, Typhoon Yagi downgraded to a tropical depression. But Vietnam is yet to recover from the damage. The weather agency has warned of more floods and landslides. And it's not alone. Before Vietnam, Typhoon Yagi wreaked havoc in China and the Philippines. At least 24 people were killed, about 100 were injured in both these countries. China even evacuated some 400,000 people. So what explains the ferocity of this typhoon? Like every other freak weather phenomenon, it's climate change. Typhoons are not new in the region, but of late they've become more powerful. They start forming near the coast, then they intensify fast, and finally they make their landfall staying on land longer than before. That makes them turbocharged, leading to more damage and destruction. Typhoon Yagi was no different, and it's time the region is better prepared for more such freak weather.
Violence has flared up in Manipur again, this time with dangerous new weapons, drones and rockets. At least 6 people have died in this new flare-up. More than 12 others have been injured. And residents are fed up with the constant violence. Today, students hit the streets of Imphal. They slammed the government for its inaction. And how did the cops respond? With a crackdown. Some protesters were repelled with tear gas. The state of Manipur in northeast India has been gripped by ethnic violence since May last year. There are 2 warring sides, the majority Meiteis who live in the valley and Kukis who live in the hills. The violence began over a court decision, a move to give government quotas to the Meiteis. The minority Kukis did not like this. They said their benefits were being diluted. And thus the fighting began. Since then, more than 220 people have been killed, over 60,000 have been displaced. Right now, the security forces have built a buffer zone, a corridor between the valley and the hills. The idea is to keep the warring groups apart. Enter drones and rockets. Don't think of them as sophisticated killing machines. These are crude weapons, a normal drone modified to carry explosives. But the damage is real. The first such attack was reported last weekend. Look at the aftermath. Kuki militants are said to have fired these drones. They're also using rockets. Again, not real ones. These are crude versions of rockets. One rocket targeted the home of Manipur's first chief minister, the late Koireng Singh. The rocket killed 1 man and left 5 others injured, all Meitei victims. You can imagine what happened next. Both communities clashed in villages near the hills. Intense gunfights broke out and a number of people died. So clearly the situation is worsening. The question is, what is the state government doing? Well, Chief Minister Biren Singh is up to something. He met Manipur's governor on Sunday. Reports say that he submitted a list of demands to the governor, like fencing the Myanmar border, preparing a register of citizens starting from 1961, cancelling a 2008 agreement with Kuki militants, and finally handing over the unified command of the state. And this last one is very important. Around 60,000 central forces are deployed in Manipur, but they're not controlled by the chief minister. They answer to the Manipur government security advisor. And who is the security advisor? A retired paramilitary chief. Apparently, the chief minister is not happy with this arrangement. He wants the command forces to command these central forces. He wants them to report to him. And what would he do with this power? Reports say he wants targeted operations against militants in the hills, possibly the Kukis. Of course, none of this is official. The chief minister has refused to confirm any of it, but he is making some bold claims. Biren Singh says that he will bring peace to Manipur in 6 months. He will also appoint a peace envoy. He has appointed one, in fact, someone who will negotiate with the Kukis. But the problem is trust. Most Kuki groups do not trust the chief minister. They've accused him of fanning the flames. So will they agree to sit down with him? Will they trust his promises? That is the big question. You cannot bet on military solutions to ethnic violence. Just look at what happened this time. Central forces kept the 2 warring sides apart. So what did the Kuki militants do? They turned to drones and rockets. Unless there is a lasting peace, this will keep happening. We are not talking about some foreign enemy. These are Indian citizens after all. So the only way out is dialogue. Now we turn to India's most fiscally irresponsible neighbour, Pakistan. The country has never been great at managing finances. Over the years, it has had to seek multiple bailouts from the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. Since the year 1958, Pakistan has received 23 IMF bailouts, 23, which is the highest for any country in the world. And now it is looking for bailout number 24. Islamabad got a deal in the month of July. The IMF said it would grant a $7 billion in loans. It would grant Pakistan $7 billion in loans over the course of 3 years. This was a staff-level agreement. A final approval was still required from the IMF's executive board. That approval keeps getting delayed. It was first scheduled for August, then early September, and now it could come by the 18th of this month. If it comes at all, that is. So it's not a done deal. And all these delays have left Islamabad anxious. The government has started lashing out. Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister Ishaq Dar made a statement over the weekend. He said, and I'm quoting, "In the past 2.5 years, attempts have been made to sabotage Pakistan's critical negotiations with the IMF. There was geopolitics at play when Pakistan was close to default. Why shouldn't I raise a finger when our technical review is complete? Why are they wasting our time?" Now, Ishaq Dar is not a nobody. He's Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister. He's also their Foreign Affairs Minister, and he has been Finance Minister 4 times in the past, which means that he probably had to negotiate about half a dozen of these bailouts himself. Ishaq Dar says that a game is afoot and that the IMF is intentionally delaying the bailout approval. He barely stopped short of saying that the IMF wants Pakistan to fail. Now, the IMF, we know, is no angel. It has caused its fair share of problems across the world. But does the lender really want to topple Pakistan's government? Well, that seems a bit far-fetched. A simpler explanation is that the IMF is angry with Pakistan's politicians for spending money that they do not have on things like new subsidies, or for failing to control debt in key industries like the country's crippled power sector, or maybe the IMF just wants Islamabad to stick to agreed upon terms, like getting other lenders to roll over some existing debt, other lenders like China. Rolling over debt means delaying your payments or renegotiating the terms of your loan because you're unable to pay. This was a precondition for IMF bailout number 24. But Pakistan has not managed to convince the likes of China to roll over its debt. So why should the IMF board approve the latest bailout? But perhaps Ishaq Dar is correct. There may really be an attempt to sabotage the IMF deal. However, the saboteurs are not the International Monetary Fund. They are Pakistan's irresponsible politicians themselves who keep putting political gain above the country's long-term stability. After this tirade against the IMF, Dar went off on a different tangent. He took part in his party's favourite pastime, criticising Imran Khan. Imran Khan is Pakistan's former Prime Minister who is currently in jail. He was arrested last year. And he's been facing one case after another. Every time he gets bail, another case magically pops up. Imran Khan says he's facing some 150 cases, and because of that, he has been in jail for 400 days now. He crossed that milestone yesterday, 400 days in jail. So his supporters decided to take to the streets. A massive rally took place in Islamabad yesterday. Thousands of people gathered, and they put forth an ultimatum.
पाकिस्तानियों सुन लो, 1 से 2 हफ्ते में कानूनी तौर पर इमरान खान रिहा ना हुआ तो खुदा की कसम हम इमरान खान को भी खुद रिहा करेंगे। तैयार हो? तैयार हो? हक के लिए तैयार हो? मैं आपको लीड करूंगा, मैं आपको लीड करूंगा। पहली गोली मैं खाऊंगा, आगे मैं हूंगा, पीछे नहीं हटना।
इंशाल्लाह खान साहब के आवाज से लब्बैक कहेंगे और खान साहब बहुत जल्द इंशाल्लाह ताला रिहा होंगे। ये सारी कौम गवाही दे रही है कि ये सारी कौम किसके साथ है? पेटी नंबर 804 के साथ है।
Pakistan is facing an economic crisis with the IMF bailout delay, and now the government is gearing up for a political standoff. They've been given an ultimatum, 2 weeks to set Imran Khan free. They probably won't be doing that. So we could see clashes in the weeks ahead. Will things turn around then? Or will Pakistan's problems just get worse? Either way, we'll be tracking it for you. Now let's talk about Pope Francis. He's on a mega tour of Asia. He's already covered 2 countries and now he's on to his third one, Timor Leste. It may be a small island in Southeast Asia, but this is a special stop because 97% of its population is Catholic, which is second only to the Vatican, where 100% of the population is Catholic. Pope Francis is the first pope to visit the island since its independence in 2002. That's when Timor-Leste became a separate country, 2002. So this visit is a significant one. But it's not one without controversy. A statement from the Pope has triggered a debate because he questioned choosing pets over families. Our next report tells you more.
This is Timor-Leste, an island nation in Southeast Asia. Today, Pope Francis arrived here, the penultimate stop of his 12-day-long Asia tour. But why this small island? The answer lies in its population. Timor-Leste is home to 1.3 million people. 97% of them are Catholic. This makes it the world's second most Catholic country after the Vatican. Which is why the Pope is here. He will address an open-air mass. Half of the island is set to attend, so it's a big deal. The government has allocated $12 million for this visit. It may seem like a meager amount, but for the island's small economy, it's exorbitant. Pope Francis is the second pope to visit the island after Pope John Paul II. But this is the very first visit by any pope since the island's independence in the year 2002. However, Pope Francis's visit has come under scrutiny, and it's because of Timor-Leste's history of abuse scandals. In 2022, the Vatican sanctioned Timorese bishop Carlos Felipe Jimenez Bello. He sexually abused boys on the island in the 1990s. He also paid them to stay silent. Then there's priest Richard Dashbach. He was sentenced to prison for 12 years in 2021. He was sexually abusing minor girls on the island. Now, Pope Francis has spoken out on the abuse, but he did not denounce the 2 men.
We shall not forget those children and adolescents that have their dignity violated. This phenomenon is happening across the world. In response, we are all called to do everything possible to prevent every kind of abuse and guarantee a peaceful growth for all young people.
Which brings us to the Pope's tour. It's the longest of his papacy. He first landed in Indonesia, then went to Papua New Guinea, moving to Timor-Leste, and his next and final stop is Singapore. 3 of these countries are not even Catholic majority. So why is the 88-year-old pontiff, who's battling health issues, touring them? It's because of the growing presence of the Catholic Church in the Asia-Pacific. During this trip, Pope Francis made a joint call for peace with Indonesia's Grand Imam. He has called for unity. He has warned against extremism and violence. But there's one statement of his that's triggered a controversy.
With the law of death, that is, by limiting births, limiting the greatest wealth a country has, which is births. And your country, on the other hand, has families with 3, 4, or 5 children that keep moving forward, and this is reflected in the age levels of the country. Keep it up. You're an example for everyone, for all the countries that may be, and this might sound funny, these families prefer to have a cat or a little dog instead of a child.
The Pope is questioning people who choose pets over children, and it's not the first time. The pontiff has long been vocal about falling birth rates in the West. In 2022, he said choosing pets over kids is selfish. In 2014, he called it a cultural degradation. This time is no different. Now, Pope Francis is seen as a progressive pontiff. With this megatrip, he's trying to reach out to a younger population. But his strident stance on family planning might be alienating his new target audience.
Our next story is from Algeria. It is Africa's largest country by area, home to about 47 million people and a major oil and natural gas exporter. Algeria just held its presidential election. It took place on Saturday. There were 3 candidates in the race, one of them being the incumbent. That's President Abdelmadjid Tebboune. The election results are in, and the 78-year-old Tebboune has won the second term. In fact, he won with a whopping 95% of the vote. He will now go on to serve another 5 years in office. Now, let's pause here for a second. Just think about what I said. Algeria's 78-year-old president just won 95% of the vote, 95%. Does that strike you as a little odd? How does someone become that popular? For context, let's look at the recent Russian election, which was held in March this year. Vladimir Putin won that election. He was expected to win. He won with about 88% of the vote. Now let that sink in. Even Putin did not cross the 90% threshold. But Tebboune somehow managed almost 95%. How did that happen?
You know, over there, there's not much choice. Either you submit or you keep quiet. Silence, or you go to prison, or you go into exile. There aren't many other choices.
That's a bleak assessment, but accurate. Only 3 candidates finally took part in the election, but a lot more had wanted to contest. More than 24 candidates were disqualified or forced to resign. There were barriers to contesting, and the election dates were brought forward, all to benefit the incumbent. Now, does any of this seem fair to you? It did not to Algerians either. The voter turnout is telling. When the results were announced, about 5.6 million votes had been tallied. Algeria's electorate is 24 million strong, which means the voter turnout was just around 23%. So less than a quarter of registered voters went to cast their ballots. That doesn't really show the election in a good light, does it? Basically, the people knew that it was a sham. They decided to not waste their time. Now, after hearing all of this, how do you think the world reacted, especially the Western world, the so-called champions of democracy and all that jazz? Let's look at the United States. Washington is always quick to condemn dubious elections, after all. This was the U.S. State Department's reaction to Putin's victory in March. They said Russia's presidential election occurred in an environment, and I'm quoting, an environment of intense repression. They said the election, and I'm quoting again, could only be described as undemocratic. Strong words for Russia. Same with Venezuela. When Maduro won the presidential election in July, the US said that the election was deeply flawed and that the official results did not have any credibility. So how has the United States reacted to the Algerian election? Well, here's their statement, short and sweet. The US congratulated Algeria. They said that they were looking forward to further cooperation and reiterated that Algeria was a valued partner. That's it. No sermons, no pointing out any flaws. Nothing. Europe has also been suspiciously quiet. France has congratulated Tebboune on a second term. But the rest of Europe seems to be intentionally ignoring the result. Why is that? Why can't the West say anything right now? Well, it's because Algeria is a valuable ally to them. Algiers helps Europe with 2 crucial matters, fuel and migration. Algeria is now Europe's 2nd largest gas supplier. This has happened in the last 2 years, since Russia invaded Ukraine. Europe needed an alternative for Russian gas, so they tied up with Algeria. Now they have to keep their mouth shut or risk another fuel crisis. So that's the first reason why they won't say anything to Algeria. The second reason is migration. Europe is facing a migrant overload. Thousands try to enter Europe illegally every year, often by crossing the Mediterranean Sea. Their point of departure is usually North Africa, or countries like Algeria, neighboring Tunisia and Morocco. So Europe has been trying to get these countries to help stop the migration. It has signed deals with them and given millions in exchange for stopping the migrants. Basically, the North African nations are doing Europe's dirty work, acting like Europe's bouncers and stopping migrants from crossing into the Mediterranean. This gives countries like Algeria even more leverage. Europe knows that too many sermons could backfire. Algeria could open the floodgates. And that is why Europe is not saying anything, and why Big Brother America is actually cheering Algeria on. The West keeps pretending to be the champion of democracy, but they actually do not mind autocrats as long as the autocrat works for Western interests. Another classic case of Western hypocrisy. Now let's look at Mexico, where a battle is unfolding between thousands of court workers and a defiant leader on his last crusade. This is Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the president of Mexico. Slight correction, he's the outgoing president of Mexico, enjoying his last few weeks in office. But he has unfinished business. Before Obrador leaves in October, he wants to redesign the country's judiciary to elect judges instead of appointing them. Mexico has more than 7,000 judges. How are they chosen? Through an appointment-based system. Selected based on 3 parameters: tests, qualifications and training. Basically, aspirants work for years and based on their record, they slowly climb higher. Now, these aspirants are in a state of shock. Their career paths have been appended because the president wants voters to elect judges, all of them, from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to judges of local district courts. So anyone with a law degree and a few years of judicial experience could become a judge. There will be fewer hoops to jump. So unqualified lawyers could end up becoming judges if they receive enough votes. Obrador says this will hold judges accountable. It will instill trust in the judiciary and help fight corruption. But critics disagree. They say that this move will make things worse. The judiciary will be more loyal to the ruling party, and in a country where organized crime is rampant, criminals will field their own candidates. Basically, judicial independence will erode. So tensions are spilling into the streets. There are massive protests. Judicial workers are on a strike.
What worries me is that power will be with a single person. There are 3 powers of the union so that if one fails, the others can ensure order.
We will not be at the service of a political party. Judges should not be elected by popular vote. Judges must be elected according to their knowledge, studies, and exam results, according to the career in the judiciary that has allowed them to reach that position.
We are being attacked and accused of being corrupt when those who are accusing us of being corrupt are the real corrupt ones. So, they left us no choice but to take to the streets.
The anger is palpable, but Obrador remains undeterred. Last week, he pushed the bill in Parliament. It was passed by the lower house. This week, it will go to the Senate, where it is also expected to pass. And if it does, this will be one of the biggest judicial overhauls of any major democracy. But will it work? To answer this, let's go back to the basics. How are judges selected across the world? There are 3 main systems. The first is appointment, where a judicial council selects the judges, usually with approval from the legislature. Now, this is the most common system across the world. From India to New Zealand to the UK and South Africa, this is what they follow. The second system is examination, where judges are part of the civil service. Countries like Egypt, Finland, France, Singapore, they all follow this. And finally, the third and the most convoluted system, which is the election system. Here, judges are directly elected to their positions. Few countries follow this, including the US, Japan, Switzerland, Bolivia, and Northern Mariana Islands. These are tiny islands south of Japan. So proponents of the election system form a tiny club, and their judicial systems vary, even within this club. In Japan, only justices are appointed and reviewed by popular referendum. In the US and Switzerland, state judges are elected, but federal judges are appointed. But none of these countries come close to what Obrador is proposing. He plans to remove all kinds of checks across the board, and on some level, he has a point. The appointment system does have a lot of drawbacks. It can be opaque, slow-moving, and lacking in accountability. All of that is fair, but it is also the lesser evil because the election system is also far from perfect. It is not insulated from corruption, like in the US, where judges rule in favor of their campaign donors, especially when they seek re-election. It is not safe from power grab either, like in Bolivia, where only some of the top judges are elected. They're known to repeatedly go after opponents of the ruling party. Basically, an elected judiciary can be all kinds of problematic. Elections tend to be politicized. Judges can favor political interests or come under pressure to align with public opinion. But you see, judges are not politicians. So the judiciary should not be a popularity contest. Otherwise, where does it end? You be the judge. Mexico's current appointment system has its flaws. It can do with more transparency and accessibility, but better checks and balances can do the job. By choosing popular vote, Mexico will remove whatever checks remain and declare open season on its judiciary. For our joke of the day, let me ask you a question. How do you figure out if it's a holiday? For many of us, it's marked on a calendar. That's an extra day of rest beyond your weekends. But there's another way of tracking holidays here in India, and that's looking at Vijay Mallya's Twitter, or X. The same Vijay Mallya who owes 9,000 crore rupees to 17 Indian banks, the fugitive businessman, is currently in the UK. But on Twitter, or X, he seems to be on a self-imposed exile. He emerges to post only on public holidays, like this Friday. It was the occasion of Ganesh Chaturthi. And there was Vijay Mallya tweeting his well wishes. Now, it could be innocent holiday cheer, but here's the irony. All of these are also bank holidays. Of course, the internet could not get enough of it. And right now, jokes are piling like Mallya's unpaid loans. Take a look.
संडे को मस्त नहा धो के आ और आना, मैं तुम्हें घर पे आके देके जाऊंगा संडे को, पक्का ना? पक्का.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. The Paris 2024 Paralympics closes with fireworks lighting up the sky. The Polish army honors its four-legged soldiers, giving them a military rank. And Kenya holds a concert to raise funds for violence-hit Haiti. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1948, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was established, that is North Korea. Kim Il-sung was the first leader of the new state. By 1949, it became a full-fledged communist country. Kim Il-sung's heirs still rule North Korea, including his grandson and current leader, Kim Jong-un. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.